Hello, and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake or stir a cocktail or other mixed drink, have a sip, talk a bit about its history, some variants of it, and see how it stacks up. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's official list of cocktails to see how those are. We're in our second section, the contemporary classics, and this week's classic is the Caipirinha. Now let me first say that while I think that's close to how you say Caipirinha, I'm sure it's not quite right. Brazilian Portuguese phonology kind of confuses me a little bit. The phonemic distinctions based on nasalizing vowels and the different realizations of R, whether it's a tap or whether it's actually fricative, I can't quite make the sounds work. So I'm sure that's slightly wrong, and I apologize, but that was as close as I could do. The Caipirinha is a drink that's becoming much more common other places outside of Brazil. It is their national drink. They're very proud of it. There are even laws in Brazil about what officially comprises one, but it is beginning to become popular in other places, such as here in the States, and that is largely because the needed spirit is beginning to become available outside of Brazil, especially higher quality variants of it. And that spirit, of course, is Cachaça. Now, we have not talked about Cachaça at all so far on this channel, so we're going to have to do that a bit today. Now, Cachaça is often lumped in with rums, and while I think that putting it in the sort of rum category very broadly to understand the type of thing that it is makes sense, it is similar to rum in many ways, it's important to realize that people are very serious about it not being called rum. Just as you would not take one of those green jars of powdered cheese product to Italy and claim that that was actually Pecorino Romano or Parmigiano Reggiano, you would not take rum to Brazil you would not take rum to Brazil and say that it's cachaça, because they are slightly different things. Now, they originate in the same basic idea, the idea of taking sugar cane and somehow then turning that into a spirit. So some sort of a fermentation is going to happen and some sort of a distillation is going to happen. Now, the vast majority of rums are made partially or wholly from molasses, which is basically what you're left over with after you've extracted the sugar out of sugarcane. It's thick, it's rich, it has a bit more developed flavor to it, a little bit less inherent sweetness to it. Now, the Portuguese on the island of Madeira back in the late 15th century started making a type of aguardente, rum-like product, using sugarcane juice. The same thing happened other places as well, but this is using the unrefined sugarcane juice itself, fresh from the sugarcane, and then fermenting and distilling that, etc. The closest expression of this in the land of things that are called rums would be a rum agricole. So this is a Martinique rum agricole. This is also a fresh sugarcane product. Now, both of these examples are nearly unaged. These are silver or white spirits. These are going to be fairly similar at this point, with the differentiation that a rum agricole is going to be column distilled almost always. There are a few islands which are not part of any AOC, and so make things called rum agricoles that don't meet the official definitions, but just about any rum agricole you see is going to be column distilled, whereas it depends for cachaças, and in this case, this Novo Fogo, for example, is very slowly pot distilled. I'm not going to dive deep into that this episode. I don't know if I've mentioned it before. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a future episode. Column distillation tends to be slightly cleaner, slightly less flavorful, whereas pot distillation tends to be a little bit more funky, a little bit more flavorful. So we can talk about that more another time. But those are big differences in the production. Then the aging is different as well. So when agricoles are aged, it's going to be in French oak. When cachaças are aged, it's going to be often in various Brazilian native hardwoods. And so you're going to get much different wood character in those sorts of products. So it is vaguely similar to a rum agricole. If that's all you have on hand, you could certainly use it and get a similar result. If you were to use something like just a white rum like a Bacardi, you'd be straying quite a bit further away because it's going to be a sort of more distilled product, more filtered product, and be starting from molasses or a mixture of various sugar products. And so it's going to be less vegetal, less grassy notes, less funk in that sort of sense. Now, we're not going to do anything too crazy today. We're going to make two variants that are identical in ingredients, one following the IBA spec and one a little bit differently. And then we are going to make one variant that I found that someone else created. With that out of the way, let's make the first one. All right, for drink number one. This is going to be the IBA spec. This is going to be fairly common to how you see this drink built many places. This is a drink we're going to go ahead and build in the glass. And so we're going to start off here with a lime. And we want to cut that into small wedges, which I've seen this done as wheels. I've seen this done as 4 wedges. I've seen this done as more than 4 wedges. The IBA doesn't really clearly state what they're looking for here. I'm going to kind of split the difference, and I'm going to do wedges, but not very large ones. All right, now I'm just going to put all of my little lime wedges here into my glass. And then to that, we want to add some sugar. And so IBA calls for 4 teaspoons. I'm using this bigger, really crummy bar spoon here. I'm just gonna have a bar spoon of that for me, I think. We can always add some more later. This is somewhere where we want to use actual granular sugar, at least in theory. I think in practice, building this in the glass like this, you're not gonna get its full effect. But the idea is that we want to softly muddle these limes. And having the sugar in there means that, both during the muddling and during the stirring, that's going to cause some amount of abrasion to the skin of the limes. And that's going to release some of the oils from the limes. And this is the main difference from this drink and something like a daiquiri, other than, of course, the all-important spirit distinction, is that in this variant, we're getting more sort of flavor of the lime skin, as well as what happens as the liqueur sort of sits, or not the liqueur, the liquor sits in contact with the lime flesh, rather than just the juice itself. Next, the IBA invites us to fill this with cracked ice. I think they mean crushed ice based on some of the pictures that are available of it, but they have called for cracked, so we will do that here, and we'll talk about crushed ice in a little bit. And now we'll add our primary ingredient, 60 milliliters or 2 ounces of cachaça. This is typically made with an unaged or white or silver cachaça. Some folks do like this with an aged product or a mixture. I think that's fun. That's just not the traditional way to do it. We're going to add that, and then it says to stir that gently. The actual phrase is stir gently to involve ingredients, which is odd. Now, a lot of folks at this point, especially if you were using crushed ice, would add a little bit more crushed ice now to bring this back up. I'm not going to. I don't think it's needed. No garnish is asked for here by the IBA. I think this actually looks nice with a little lime wheel. So I'm going to call an audible here and add one. And that is our IBA spec Caipirinha. So the nose is pretty much just all that cachaça. There's a little bit of maybe the lime, but it's pretty much just cachaça, which has a really big rum funk note. There is banana in it, but it doesn't necessarily read as what you're thinking of as like a banana funk. It is a sort of, it has that banana sourness to it, but it's a little bit sourer. It's a little bit more sour. It's a little bit herbaceous almost. There's a sort of grass or herbal note to it. So that's just a lot of fun right away. I get this little punch of acidity, but also sweetness that aren't quite melded. And then I get this really broad tart hit, which is the lime, right? That just feels incredibly wide though, more so than usual, because all of that cachaça stuff is suddenly happening at the same time. And so from that cachaça, I'm getting this little bit of funk that's also bright and sort of citrusy in and of itself. And then it fades out really cleanly. There's almost a saltiness left on the palate. It's not really salt, but it's almost in that realm. It just feels very clean, slight minerality, and then just fades out really nicely. I think this is a lovely drink. I love the simplicity of it and just being able to enjoy a decent quality cachaça again, or if you had something like a rum agricole or like a related Haitian rum, like a rum barbancourt, which isn't technically a rum agricole but kind of is. I think this would be a great preparation for any of those. I think that using something less characterful in here, like something just like a Bacardi, it would be a really boring drink. And in that case, you actually might want more sweetness or to add a little bit of extra lime juice to it at the end or something like that to make the drink pop. But here, there's a lot to dig into. All right, for our second version, we're gonna keep pretty much everything the same except for methodology. And so my thoughts here are two. First of all, some folks advocate for cutting the limes a little bit differently and taking care to remove the pith that is in the core of the lime. The pith, which is of course the white part sort of under the skin, as well as what is running through like the supreme segments or in the core, depending on the citrus involved, that's going to be bitter. And so removing the pith, especially the more you're going to engage the alcohol with the fruit, will give you cleaner overall extraction. And then secondly, switching this to a shaken drink instead of a built stirred one. The idea here being, and this is less common, but it does happen some places. My idea here is that A, we're going to just get better integration in general. You're always going to integrate fruit juice better into alcohol if you shake it. And two, we will get better extraction of the oils and compounds like that from the skin, from the peel, because we're going to have this additional agitation of the ice and sugar in contact with that peel. So this is going to be very simple build instruction wise. So we're again going to take a lime. And I cut this just a little bit off center here, so it'll make it easy to remove the center pith in one fell swoop. I've now removed the tops and bottoms as well as the pithy core, and I'm going to add those to our shaker. Again, I'm going to add 1 large bar spoon, somewhere between 2 and 4 teaspoons to your taste preference, or more or less, it's to your taste preference. Then we're going to muddle that. This time I'm going to muddle it slightly more, because I do want to release a good bit of those juices, as well as because I have these slightly larger, I'm actually able to rub on the skin a little bit and try to get some extraction there. I'm still not shoving it down really hard. I'm not trying to break them in half. I'm just trying to get lots of contact with them. We'll add again our 60 milliliters of the cachaça. We're going to add 1 big and a few small cubes. And let's mix it. All right, and then we're just going to go ahead and pour that into our double old-fashioned glass. You could have done a super wide gated pour to keep out the big cube if you wanted to. That might have been a better look. Or you could have shaken it more fully to completion, in which case that cube would have broken up further. However, at that point, I think we would have added an amount of water that I don't necessarily want to add. I'm going to garnish it the same way. This is a common drink to use a straw in, especially if you did have this giant cube. Actually, yeah, I'll grab a straw. And if you're wondering why I always have these sort of lame old cheapy plastic straws instead of some nice fancy metal straws or something, it's because I found a full box of them in the back of the cabinet right around the time I started this channel. So we're going through those. Alright, and this is the shaken Caipirinha. So nose is slightly more muted, which I think is a mixture of having additional dilution, as well as the fact that there is now more lime juice very much integrated in like an actual like mixture, a solution with the cachaça, rather than them being sort of incredibly heterogeneous. And that's exactly what the flavor tells me as well. So there's less of a distinct segmentation to it. It sort of all hits and then grows and grows and grows and then fades, but it's all the same thing throughout. And that's not to say there's no evolution, because there's a lot of flavors happening at each stage, but I'm tasting them less in pieces. The lime flavor's a little bit richer. I think I did increase my oil extraction, but the additional dilution means that the overall drink does hit slightly less hard. So I'm still getting funk, I'm still getting tart, but I'm getting a slightly richer, limey citrus thing that's not so much lime juice as the actual idea of lime. I think it's delicious. I'm not honestly sure which one I prefer. I think that the first one is certainly lower effort and results in fewer pieces of glass or mixware to clean, so that's probably a perfectly fine choice, but I definitely think to some folks this would be more to their palate, and I won't criticize you either way. Alright, so before we make the final variant, just to go back to what we normally cover toward the beginning of the episode, which is the history of the drink. Now, this drink has a fairly mixed up history that's unclear, and I think that's kind of fine for a number of reasons. The crucial part of the drink is that it is cachaça, fruit, and sugar, right? That is the bones of the drink. And to that end, I think that to some extent, asking where it was created is much like asking where any other drink as simple with ingredients that were as common for so many hundreds of years were created. Many people have certainly invented this drink over the years, right? We have, citrus being introduced into rum rations in various national armies back in the 18th century. We have lots of punches, which happened obviously in England, where the American punch tradition came from, but also in Portugal, where on the island of Madeira, where the supposed ancestor to cachaça is from, they have a thing called puncho or something like that. Comes from the same Hindi etymology as the English word punch, which is a mixture of a sugar cane aguardiente with honey and sometimes sugar and some kind of lemon juice usually. So these sorts of things have floated around in many places over a lot of time. Someone tried this various places. There are 3 stories for where it came from. One is that drink called puncho or something like that, though that story has no evidence to it other than that the drinks are similar as far as I can see. The other Portuguese connection says that this drink was created more in that style with honey and sometimes garlic as a flu cure around the time of the Spanish flu in 1917 or thereabouts, and that then it spread from there. I think this is certainly possible that it did become popular there from that. It seems like to this day there are communities in which this or similar drinks are seen as some sort of a flu cure or general way to, get you moving when you're feeling ill, something like that. The other common story is that sometime in the early to mid 19th century, landowning farmers in Brazil who grew a lot of sugarcane made the drink and served it at all their large fancy parties, both as a good drink and a way to showcase the great stuff that they were getting from their sugarcane, the great cachaça that they were making from it. I think all these stories could be true, and yet probably none of them are really the first person who said, let's squeeze some citrus into our cachaça. some guy did that. I don't know who that guy was, but he did that. But this drink was definitely around in the early 20th century, and I think the evidence is pretty clear that it was definitely around in the mid-19th century. Now, one thing to note, and the reason why I'm putting it here, is that the citruses involved are kind of in question. Citrus is weird. If you're not familiar with it sort of biologically, almost everything you think of as a citrus fruit is the same species, all just cross-hybrid after cross-hybrid after cross-hybrid of various variants of citrus. So there's so many kinds of citrus and so many things that even though in most places there's sort of one thing sold as a lemon and one as a lime, there are lots of other types of limes that you haven't had depending on where you live in the world, and there are green lemons of varying types that are used. And so the earliest versions of this drink were almost certainly made with something very different from lemons or limes that we commonly have, at least in the States today. Various types of green lemons. Also, other fruits have been used. So by Brazilian law, a caipirinha is like the one I made earlier. It uses limes and cachaça, and that's about it. There's, I think, a few other kinds of citrus that might be acceptable, but they're very similar to sort of lemon-lime products. However, it's very common in Brazil to get things called an ex-caipirinha, meaning a strawberry caipirinha, or a pineapple caipirinha, or something else. There's a similar or possibly the same drink called a caipirfruta, which is where you use other fruits, often a mixture of different fruits muddled in with the cachaça and sugar. And so this gives rise to a whole bunch of different things that are all sort of within that family of drinks. Now, I found an interesting recipe that we're going to try today, which sort of bridges two things. One is bringing in a different thing in the citrus family, and one is adding in Campari, which we all know is my favorite spirit. There are also variants of the caipirinha which don't carry that name. They carry a variety of names where you swap the spirit. So there's one where you swap for vodka, there's one where you swap for rum, there's one where you swap for a Portuguese liqueur that I was unable to source, then one where you swap for Campari. And so this drink does sort of the best of both worlds to some extent. We get to play with another citrus, and we get to bring in Campari. All right, so Audrey Morgan created a drink called the Caipirinha. And I did not create this, so no one get mad at me for messing with a caipirinha. But it's a clever idea, and I like where this is going. So here we're going to use kumquats, a criminally underused citrus that has a really unique flavor. I think that the only reason why people don't use these is because they're tiny and have very little actually going on inside of them, so they're a little bit annoying to work with. But we're going to start with 4 of these halved. Alright, to that we're going to add some demerara sugar. I believe she called for 2 teaspoons. I'm going to do a sort of half to 3/4 big bar spoon. Again, this is entirely to your taste. And we're going to again muddle those together. Now we want to add 30 milliliters or 1 ounce each of Campari and Nogofogo. And we need crushed ice. Now, we have not done crushed ice so far on this program, so this is an ice mallet, and this is a Lewis bag. Lewis bag is just a canvas bag designed to put ice in. It's canvas such that you're going to get a little bit of melting. This will help from keeping that going absolutely everywhere, but also will sort of let it out in a way that if you were to put this in a plastic bag, A, you'd rip through it when you crushed it, but B, you'd end up with just a whole pool of water in your bag. So let's get some ice in here, and let's get to hammering. And so with such a method, we can get some however fine we wish ice. I'm just going to throw, I didn't crush it incredibly finely. Yeah, those pieces are actually a little bit too big, but that's okay. It was getting very loud. I was worried my neighbors would kill me. Give that a stir. And then we're going to top with more. And then into here I'm going to throw a split kumquat on the top, as well as, even though there's none in the drink, I like the lime wheels. on this sort of thing. So we'll go with yet another line wheel, just a thin one here. Run the kumquat there, and then this one, any crushed ice drink is definitely a straw drink. I'm gonna have to work out a quieter method of that for whenever we get to all the crushed ice drinks, because I'm very worried about how much that sound carried into everyone's apartment. Let's try out the Caipirinha. So, with all that crushed ice, it's hard to get a really strong nose. I get just a bit of the funk of the Cachaça. Whoa. Okay, that rules. So very front of the palate, I'm getting the citrus notes. So kumquats are sort of like a tangerine that's more mild, kinda. And I'm getting that, which then immediately begins to be replaced by the Campari. Those bitter sort of gentian, I don't know if it's gentian, but that sort of family of rooty, bitter things. And then I get just the funk of the Novafogo with just a hair of the sweetness as well. So it's not the sweetness sort of inherent to the Novafogo, but it is that Demerara sugar and Novafogo funk. And then there's just a slow tail of just the bitterness of the Campari outside of its characteristic flavors, just a light bitterness. I love this. This really pops. It's tart, it's bitter, it's clearly boozy, but really fresh and fun. And this would be an absolute, I've never tried this before, and this would be an absolute go-to sipper for me whenever the summer comes around. Unfortunately, it is not the summer, so it's not really needed, but this will be in my July rotation this year. Well, thanks so much for coming along with me this week as we looked a bit at the Caipirinha and things to do with Cachaça. I would highly encourage you to try one this week, or indeed something with Cachaça if you haven't before. I know a lot of folks still haven't tried it. I will say you certainly don't need to go find a $100 aged specialty bottle of it, but there are some Cachaças out there that are cheap and not very good. So if the Cachaça is shockingly the same price as the Bacardi, I wouldn't buy that. Novafogo is a nice choice. It is a sort of mid-priced spirit that I think is pretty good quality. Hopefully you'll try one of these this week. Hopefully you'll visit the blog, shakingandsipping.com. We'll have a write-up of this and each other drink, as well as most weeks we'll have IBA in real life, where the day after this video posts, I'll have a post about going to a local Seattle cocktail bar and seeing how they make it, if they make it often, if they have variants on it, etc. You can follow on Twitter at shaking_sipping. That's where I'll have updates on when we have things like that appearing on the blog. I would love for you to do all of the YouTube things that I'm required to ask, like share, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and watch every other video on this channel. This is the 35th or so IBA video, as well as a few others. So thanks for all that. Thanks for watching. I'll be back next week with the next drink on the IBA list. And until then, happy sipping. Cheers.